When it comes to your retirement, do you want to have the same old plan everyone else has? Of course not. You're unique and have your own goals and dreams. Don't be treated just like a number. This is your retirement. So it's time to think differently. And you're in luck because you've found the Retire Your Way podcast with ILG Financial. At ILG Financial, you won't find generic, run-of-the-mill plans containing the same old cookie-cutter solutions. Dave Chase and the ILG Financial team focus on building one retirement at a time using their Think Differently philosophy. And that means your own comprehensive plan with customized solutions built to achieve just one goal, yours. So put on your Think Differently hats and get ready to take back control of your retirement today and for all the tomorrows to come. ILG Financial's Retire Your Way podcast was created just for you, and it's starting right now.
This is the Retire Your Way podcast. I'm Ron Stutz along with Dave Lopez of ILG Financial. And when it comes to retirement, you want to have the same old plan everybody else has? Of course not. You're unique and have your own goals and dreams. Don't be treated just like a number. This is your retirement, so it's time to think differently. And you're in luck because you found the Retire Your Way podcast with ILG Financial. At ILG Financial, you won't find generic run-of-the-mill plans containing the same old cookie-cutter solutions. Dave and the ILG Financial team focus on building one retirement at a time using their Think Differently philosophy. That means your own comprehensive plan with customized solutions built to achieve just one goal, yours. So put on your Think Differently hats and get ready to take back control of your retirement today. And for all the tomorrows to come, ILG Financial's Retire Your Way podcast was created just for you, and it starts right now. Dave, how are you, buddy?
I am doing great. It is always good to be back together with you, Ron, and with our listeners. So this is going to be a good show, very topical right now.
Well, we haven't talked in a while, and certainly there is a lot of conversation out there. A lot of people have questions and concerns, and we're going to express one of those main concerns that people have right now, and that's this whole student loan payment forgiveness deal. And the big topic that we have all splashed across every headline, every article, every newscast, the new student loan forgiveness plan that has been proposed by the Biden administration. What does this piece of legislation really say? What does it mean? And Dave, can you help us break through all the gossip surrounding this legislature and help us get to the root of what it means for us?
You are right. And boy, you hit it on the head. What does it mean? The news these days, not just with this topic, but all of them, I feel, and I don't know how you feel about this, Ron, the news now on all sides starts to feel more like gossip than actually news, doesn't it?
Yeah, you're right.
I mean, you hear a story, and then your first reaction is, well, what is true and what isn't? Mm-hmm. So today, what I'd like to do is not do that. Let's dive right into this loan forgiveness proposition by the Biden administration, and let's just talk about what it is and what it isn't, so people can walk away today with some concrete facts.
Okay. Well, now President Biden announced his administration's long-awaited student loan forgiveness plan. This has been talked about for a while. What does the plan say exactly?
All right. Yeah, so here's the highlights. We'll peel an onion technique a little bit today. It is going to forgive $10,000 in student loans for borrowers who have earned less than $125,000. If you're an individual, it's $250,000, I think, if you're a couple. So a $10,000 student loan forgiveness. We'll talk about the exceptions to that. If you have a Pell Grant, that's a grant for low-income students. While you were enrolled in college, Ron, you'll be eligible to have up to $20,000 of your debt forgiven. Mm-hmm. Now, here's some of the numbers and who that affects. About 43 million Americans have student loans outstanding. This would affect about 15 million of that 43 million people. So about 15 million of the student loan borrowers owe less than $10,000. And they're typically, coincidentally, the folks that are most likely to default and fail to pay their loans back. So this will eliminate, if you think 15 million owe about 10,000, but then folks that even have more than 10,000 can still qualify to get up to 10,000 forgiven, right? Yeah. So a total, they expect it to affect about 20 million, roughly, of the 43 million people. will see either loan forgiveness, maybe about 15,000 loan forgiveness, or about another 20 million will see a decrease in the amount of their loan, which would lower their payments by, maybe $250 a month per borrower. So let's do the math again. I got that wrong. About 20 million will see a reduction because they owe more than, 10 or 20. Mm-hmm. 15 million will get all of their debt wiped off altogether. So about 35 maybe million of the 43 million borrowers will see some kind of benefit.
Yeah. Now, there's a lot of math in there, and I know you understand all this stuff because you follow it every single day. But originally, the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget came up with a price tag. It was a pretty large price tag, that's for sure, for a less generous version of the program.
Yeah, it did. So it was about $230 billion was their price tag, and that version was much more restrictive. So it's almost certainly going to be much higher than $230 billion. So at this point of our podcast, we're talking big picture. Yeah. The big picture here is it's probably going to affect, in a positive way, about 35 million borrowers, and it's probably going to cost the taxpayers well over $230 billion for this, kind of a one-time event.
Wow.
The other thing, the big picture, is this really does showcase, if you're looking politically at this, it showcases the attraction and the limitation of the executive order. And, of course, what we're seeing, if for folks who aren't following it, is this isn't a law that Congress is passing. No one's voting on this. Your representatives don't have any say in this. This is the White House administration making an edict that says this is what's going to happen, and none of the other lawmakers, Congress, the House, the judicial branch, no one else is having a say in it. This is an edict. So this gives us a really good look at the executive actions and executive orders that are issued by the president, all presidents, as how it can help and hurt. So what's the attraction? Well, Biden's taking the opportunity to provide immediate financial relief to millions. That's obviously a good if there's no other bads. Mm-hmm. What's the limitation as far as the executive action? Well, you'll notice here he didn't take any action to prevent new people from falling into student loan. So it's kind of a debt trap in the future because we fixed really nothing, right? It's almost like a one-time.
Yeah.
Imagine dipping a bucket into your boat. It's got a hole in it and it's leaking water. And you'd put you dip a bucket out and throw the water out and say, look at all the water I've got out of the bucket. Well, that's good, but you fixed nothing. This whole
water's
system
still coming in. Yeah.
The system's the same. People are signing up for loans they can't afford. And that's going to be a problem, which we'll talk about a little later.
Yeah. So we know what the plan says it's going to do and accomplish. How are they going to go about doing this? What does it mean for people with loans? And one of the bigger questions, what does it mean for people without loans?
Yeah, so these are the right questions to be asking, right? And it's a good example of why we don't want to just take the sound bites that we hear on the news from either side of the political aisle, because they're designed not to give you information, in my opinion. They're designed to evoke emotional response. So that's why you come away so confused when you listen to two different newscasts or read two different articles. They use the sound bites to justify any financial decision they're making or poke holes in it if you're on the opposite side of the aisle. Mm-hmm. So what I'd like us to do is let's take just a couple minutes here and look at the facts surrounding this executive order, see what it means for everybody, whatever your personal situation. So I'm going to jump right into it, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, fine. I'm anxious to hear all this.
All right, so those who do have student loans, if you have what's called a federal direct loan. Now, what is that? That's the most common type of loan, Ron. It's one's issued before June 30th of 2022. And it's direct to the federal government. So when you hear direct loan, that means a loan directly with the federal government.
Okay.
If that's the kind of loan you have, you will be able to apply to have your outstanding balance reduced up to $10,000. All direct loans from the government are eligible. Okay, that includes loans to parents, graduate students, etc. So if it's a direct loan from the government, it's going to be eligible for this relief.
Okay.
If you qualify and your balance is less than $10,000, Ron, the whole loan will be retired, right?
Okay.
So you'll have no more debt. If you qualify and the debt's more than $10,000, then up to $10,000 of the debt will be retired. Make sense?
Okay. Yeah. Perfect sense.
The second part of it is there's another, other than direct loans, if you happen to have what's called a Pell Grant when you enrolled into college. Pell Grant was for low-income borrowers. If you had a Pell Grant, that amount, the amount that can be forgiven is up to $20,000. So you can have part of that Pell Grant relief as well. So what are the qualifications? You've noticed twice there I've said if you qualify.
Right.
You qualify only if you've earned less than $125,000 as an individual or less than $250,000 as a married couple in 2020 or 2021. So they're looking back at your 2020 tax return and your 2021 tax return to see if you qualify.
So I would imagine that would apply to, just about everybody. I mean, there aren't too many people who made that much money, who had those student loans, I would think.
Yeah, you're right. And we'll talk about a little bit why that is, why he made that rule. So the Education Department has said that about 8 million borrowers will qualify automatically because the real question here is, man, does that mean what if I didn't file taxes? A lot of people didn't file taxes in 2020 or 2021 because they didn't have income. Well, the good news for those folks is for about 8 million of the borrowers, the Education Department already has your information because you went through them to get the loans, and you'll be able to qualify for the loans just on the information they have. That means you wouldn't have to come up with your 2020 or 2021 tax returns. But that's not everybody, right? The majority of the people, remember we talked about as many as 35 million people being able to get some relief. Only about 8 million, according to the Education Department, they have data on. Okay. So the rest of them are still going to have to apply. We don't have an application yet. We don't know how it looks. It's likely going to be completely onerous if you just compared to how all the other stuff is done, even applications for relief in the past from the government. They promise it'll be available by the end of 2022, so we're yet to see what that application process is going to look like.
It looks like they would get all this stuff together before the whole thing is implemented.
Yeah, but you're looking at it the wrong way. Remember we talked about the goal is to get a soundbite out there?
Oh, yeah.
It's not actually to get the relief in anybody's hands. Remember, they've done student loan forgiveness in the past, and the big argument was nobody got any of the loan. When you jump through all the hoops, no one qualified or the bureaucracy was so laid out that you couldn't do it. Yeah. It's really about saying that you've forgiven the debt as opposed to forgiving the debt. Right? Okay. So they'll figure out how to do it later. Now, they intend to do it. Don't misunderstand me. It's just the priority isn't to get the mechanism in place. It's to say I'm giving you the free stuff, especially before the November elections. So,
of course,
you're just going to have some patience if you want to qualify. If you're not eligible for forgiveness, right, or if it pays off only part of your loan, here's the biggie. President Biden has said it's always a carrot and a stick, right? The carrot is I'm going to forgive all this loan. The stick is there will be no more moratoriums on loan repayment, which we've had since COVID. So come January 2023, your loan payments are due. So if all your loan hasn't been forgiven by that time, or you don't qualify for any forgiveness, you've got to start making your payments at that time.
Yeah.
That
has not been publicized, by the way.
That has not been publicized, right, but that is part of it. The Education Department says that non-direct loans, remember I've been talking here about direct loans, Ron, to the government? Non-direct loans, which were not made through the government, but that the government now has, and Perkins Loans, which are currently held by the federal government. So as long as the federal government now holds the loan, even if they didn't start it, they're eligible for forgiveness. But what they didn't say there is if you got a private loan that is still held privately that the government doesn't hold, right now there is no mechanism that'll in any way qualify.
You're listening to the Retire Your Way podcast with Dave Lopez, and if you'd like to have a one-on-one conversation with Dave about any of this stuff, if you have other questions that perhaps aren't covered in this podcast, call this number, 540-720-5656. Dave, all these different loans that you're talking about, what are these loans and who holds them?
Well, like we talked about, Ben, when you hear the direct loan, that means it was started by the federal government and held by the federal government. A non-direct loan means it wasn't started by the federal government, but maybe now they hold it. Maybe they took over the loan from a private entity. Right. And then there's all different types of loans. I mentioned the Perkins Loans is another one held by the federal government. So about 10 million people have federal student loan that is not a direct loan. That's about a quarter of the student loan borrowers. Most of the borrowers took out these loans before 2010 through institutions that are, or programs that are now defunct.
Yeah.
Right? Private banks may have made the loans, but they were guaranteed or subsidized by the federal government. So that now that's what we mean by non-direct, right? The federal government now has the loans. Other borrowers borrow directly from their college through a federally financed program. That's this defunct Perkins Loan program. So again, the federal government holds those loans now, so they qualify.
Yeah.
Solutions are being explored, Ron, for the minority of non-direct loans that are still held privately. But right now, according to what's listed, they're not involved, so you still owe that money.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. That still sounds really complicated to understand. I'm having a hard time keeping up with it myself, and I know that those people out there who have those student loans, it's kind of hard to take it all in. Why not just forgive all loans at this point? A lot of people may be saying that with the $10,000 cap, income limits, the application itself, with so much money being forgiven at this point, why make it so complicated? Why don't they just forgive all the loans?
Listen, it's a great question. So, like all legislation, there's usually more to it as far as the intent of the legislation than what you just see on paper. So, if you look at what's behind the motivation to why President Biden outlined the loans like this, it'll make more choice. So, let's look at the why of this plan.
Okay.
Student loan forgiveness was one of the hot topics. If you remember, we're going back in time here a couple years, back to the 2020 Democratic presidential primary elections.
Seems like 100 years ago, doesn't it?
It does. It was one of the top topics, right? Elizabeth Warren, who was running for president, she promised to forgive 50,000 of student loans as soon as she took office. Bernie Sanders, you remember that name, he vowed to cancel all debt, right? Which is very attractive if you owe debt, right? Joe Biden, when he was running, his take was that, hey, I'm going to look into debt forgiveness, right? And he pledged to support a congressional action to forgive $10,000. So that was his promise. So remember, a lot of this is politicians saying, I did what I said I was going to do.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? So there's where that $10,000 number comes in. Although he didn't wait for congressional action because the Congress wasn't able to act on it. Okay, so this was the plan, in theory, that the voters chose because they voted for Joe Biden as opposed to Sanders or Warren, right? So why did he...
Why did Biden choose the qualifications that he chose?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So he was dancing a tight wire, right? Remember, his opponents are going to claim whatever he does, if anybody of any means gets a benefit, we're saying you're giving a means to the rich, right? That's because that's been his party's buzzword is tax the rich and take money from the rich and give it to the middle class, and I'm not going to penalize anybody in middle class or lower middle class. So he's got to be very careful that he doesn't contradict that message. So he didn't want to subsidize any well-off borrowers. Imagine an Ivy League degree lawyer or a doctor, right, with a 5-figure income who gets $20,000 in debt relieved when he's, making $250,000, $300,000 a year, right? And somebody who's less wealthy struggling to get gas or food and doesn't get any benefit because they didn't go to college. So the 10,000 limit was outlined because many of the studies that they ran said that the folks with the smallest loans, let's say 10,000 or less, coincidentally, are most likely to default, believe it or not. So one of the arguments could be these people were going to default anyway, so we're almost like not giving away anything, right?
Hadn't thought about it that way.
If they weren't going to pay anyway, let's just get some political points out of it. So you get a big bang for your buck out of this large group that can't pay these loans. By forgiving their debt, in their eyes, you're forgiving everything, right? If you forgive $10,000 on a doctor's debt of $100,000, he'll probably shrug his shoulders and I'll take it, but it's not a meaningful impact that's going to get him to vote for your party.
Absolutely.
Undergraduate loans, right, as opposed to graduate loans, undergraduate loans are usually capped at about $31,000 for most students. So that's the most if you were just getting an undergraduate degree, usually for most people you couldn't borrow more than $31,000. Graduate loans, on the other hand, had no hard cap. So if you went on to graduate school for whatever your degree or doctorate or master's or things like that, where you could have hundreds of $1,000s in loans, right? And those people usually get paid more after school, right? At a minimum, even if they don't finish graduate school, they've got a bachelor's degree, so they're usually going to make more money. So they were not as concerned, or Biden wasn't as concerned with giving them relief. Okay.
So they're going to be earning more money already. So
that's right. Now, on the other hand, the folks with the small loans who didn't have the graduate degrees, those folks are actually more likely to have been the folks. Many of them are dropouts. They don't even have the college degrees. Imagine the guys who went 1 or 2 years of college and just dropped out.
Right.
And then they didn't have the means to pay the 2 or 3 semesters. They got maybe a $10,000 original loan amount, but then they didn't get a degree, so they never got the higher income or the credentials or the better wages, so they couldn't pay it back. So again, we're going for biggest bang for our buck. If we're only giving away $10,000, who do we make the biggest impression on? Okay.
That all makes sense. Yeah.
Yep.
So much of that, all that stuff is so political in nature. But, in theory, all that sounds like a no-brainer. It would help a lot of people who can't seem to get out from under that burden. But one question that's been circulating around this topic is this even legal? Can President Biden just make these kinds of decisions by himself and put them into play? I've heard people ask that question, and will Biden's political opponents try to do anything to stop all that? Yeah,
let's look at that side of the coin, because it's important to understand this plan from all angles if we're going to be able to interpret what it means for the U.S. as individuals, right, or as us as a nation, especially when it comes to your finances and your retirement planning, Ron. So no president has ever done anything like this before. So in this way, this is completely new ground. President Trump suspended student loans because of COVID, but he didn't forgive student loans, with an executive order. So
that all came under a separate law, which grants the president powers during some kind of national emergency, right?
That's right. And the presidents have done stuff during national emergencies. But notice, even then, he didn't forgive debt. He just put a moratorium on it, right? Now, you're talking about the legal side of it, Ron?
Right.
There's a lot of constitutional provisions, federal laws, legal precedents that obligate federal agencies to collect outstanding debts of all kinds. So that would not be in Biden's favor. But here's the rub. Congress has already enacted a number of specific loan forgiveness programs in the past, including eliminating remaining debt after 20 years of payments. Most folks are familiar with that, or 10 years of public service. You could get some loan forgiveness. That's been in place. So we already have some precedent for forgiving debt. The administration also recently made a decision to wipe out debt for students who attended notoriously for-profit colleges, right, that ended up either going bankrupt or had problems with viability. So we've got this precedent of them already doing relieving debt, right? So that's going to be very difficult to say this is a unique thing because it's already been done before.
I suppose it makes sense, the mind track of if Congress can decide when loans can be forgiven, when they can be forgiven, they can also decide other circumstances under which loans can be forgiven.
Yeah, they can, and we can really go in circles with this stuff, which of course is the challenge, right, is that it's always going to be a play on words. Before leaving office, this is a great example, the Trump administration lawyers issued a memorandum asserting that the Department of Education does not have the authority to unilaterally forgive loans, okay? But the Biden administration is not legally bound by the memo because the Biden administration isn't the Department of Education, right? So opponents of the debt forgiveness are really going to have a lot of hurdles, Ron, to go over legally to make their case. You would have to demonstrate, first of all, if you were going to go through it on the legal side, you're going to have to demonstrate that you would be personally harmed by the action in order to even put forth a legal lawsuit. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, merely being a taxpayer who is implicitly owes a percentage of the debt, that does not count as being harmed. Okay. So you couldn't just go to the court because you're a taxpayer. The way the plan is laid out, the benefits of the debt forgiveness are very specific, right? You get forgiveness if you make under $125,000 and you've got a direct student loan or a government-held loan. But people who it harms, the possible harms, like risk of loan forgiveness would worsen inflation, or it raises the national debt, right? Mm-hmm. That's very generalized. It's not specific to a person. So that means it's very difficult to argue legally for any organization that you're harmed, right? So imagine an organization hired by the Department of Education to service a loan, right? Or that a guarantee agency that's a quasi-political group, a quasi-government group that is helping with managing this. They hold many non-direct loans. It's hard to say that they're necessarily being harmed. So it's hard to find a party who could sue in this case. It's been very well thought out.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's say the courts allow this plan to move forward. Is it a good idea, Dave?
Well, the answer is easy there. It depends on which side of the aisle you're on, right? On one side of the coin, you have legislators like Mitch McConnell, who said student loan is a new form of socialism, right? And of course, whenever they use the word socialism, what they're really saying in that word is a lot of baggage, is that you don't own your money, right? The government owns the money. So we're taking your money and redistributing it. When you hear socialism, think redistribution of assets, right? We're taking your money. You have no say in it. We're redistributing it to people we think should have it. Mm-hmm. So McConnell says it's a form of student loan socialism, and it would be a giant slap in the face to any family or any student who sacrificed and scrimped and saved and worked extra hours to pay off his loan or to cover his college, right? Because they did all that work while someone else wasn't, and now they're getting their loan. You know, that can really hurt. If you imagine your roommate sat on the couch for 4 years and racked up student debt while you worked an extra job because you didn't want to have the debt. Yeah, and sure. 2 years after college, you worked extra shifts to pay the debt off, and now you're in the same boat because he got his forgiveness. You're going to feel like you've been hoodwinked, right? Okay. On the other side of the coin, the left are arguing that progressive debt forgiveness is a good thing. 17% of Americans 18 or older have student loans, and most of them have college degrees, right? College graduates are unambiguously better off than non-graduates, right? So they don't need the help as much. They earn more, they owe more, and they're less likely to become employed. So, there's an argument for both sides, and I think that's a good way. We talk about this in our financial planning, don't we, all the time? Mm-hmm. But you want to come to this realization that in situations like this, there really isn't a right answer, right? So it makes sense that both have good arguments. It's just give and take. What are you willing to give up to get a benefit, or what benefit are you willing not to give up because it's costing too much one way or the other?
So, Dave, the question everybody listening to this podcast has been waiting for, what does this look like for the individual taxpayer? The debt can't all just completely disappear. How does it work? And who's going to pay for this? Yeah, so that's the biggest question, right? Someone's got to pay for it. As of today, the White House hasn't and refuses to answer questions as to how this is going to be paid for. So the short answer is the net cost to the taxpayer, by all calculations, is going to be well over $250 billion. And currently, there is absolutely no plan to pay for this. Now, the Biden administration is and has been, since they took office, leaning heavily on a new economic monetary theory. It's called modern monetary theory in economics, and they've been leaning on it heavily because this it's a relatively new theory as far as being put into practice. This new modern monetary theory. It's easy for you to say.
It is, right? It espouses this belief that you do not, and hear me carefully, that you do not need to pay for all your government spending. So this idea of putting deficit under control and getting a hold of your what you owe. They say that's not necessary, that somehow it'll all work out, and that nations can, get this, and should just print whatever money they need to do whatever they need. That's, in a nutshell, modern monetary theory. Now, what's interesting is, just to get the data out there, historically, there is absolutely no precedent ever in history of modern monetary theory ever working. Right? This idea that you can just print as much money as you need and somehow that's a good thing, and then you print money for more benefits and it'll all work out somehow. And there's never, not even a plan to pay back the debt later, but you never have to pay the debt back. Yeah. That's the theory that the Biden administration right now is leaning on. And when you understand that, a lot of the decisions, like all the free money for COVID and all the moratoriums on loans and now the loan relief, and then, continually more and more plans, the Build Back Better plan, which was trillions and trillions of dollars. All of it makes sense if your belief is that there is no intention to pay any of this stuff back. Right? So the plan, there's no plan to pay it back. How that will work, we're in uncharted waters, which is why the stock market's so antsy and the economy's so antsy. The plan does nothing. And I think this is the biggest challenge to the plan, in my point of view, if you're really trying to help and not just buy votes. The real problem to the plan is it does nothing to address the core issue, which is the underlying cause of the student loan debt crisis is that the Department of Education makes about $90 billion in new student loans every year. Mm-hmm. We're doing nothing to forgive those. So again, we're forgiving one small bit of people's loans, but now we got a whole another $90 billion next year in student loans. Yeah. And every year after that, new students are racking up new loans with no plan to pay for them, no system. Colleges continue to get more expensive, which means the loans are more. Right? And the interest on those loans will continue to accrue, and the number will quickly climb back over $1.6 trillion again. And then we're in the same boat. So if this executive order holds up, Ron, future presidents could make, equally large declarations, and that can really become a problem. Imagine every 4 years forgiving another $250 billion in debt when it comes time to get votes. A lot of people who take student loans out, Ron, because of this action moving forward, a lot of young people are going to take student loans out for the first time next year and in years after that, and they're going to raise their hands and say, I'm expecting to get my loan forgiven because you did it before. Why don't I deserve a student loan forgiveness? And that's scary.
That's a question that a lot of people are asking right now, and I know that the understanding of all this is probably a lot better now with all the people listening to this podcast. But all the people who didn't listen to that podcast have so many questions remaining. And it's a complicated thing, that's for sure. Dave, thanks for taking the time to explain all this. And I understand it a lot better than I did when we started. And I'm sure that is the effect you've had on everybody else listening. So thank you so much for that, and I appreciate your taking a deep dive into all this so that we can all understand it.
Yeah, appreciate you too, Ron.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure being with you today, Dave, and I'm already looking forward to next time. You, the listener, are one step closer to learning what a customized retirement strategy can do for you, even though we didn't really talk about that today. You should always stay tuned for more of ILG Financial's Retire Your Way podcast. And if you'd like to have a conversation with Dave Lopez about your financial situation, Dave is the founder of ILG Financial, and you can go to ilgfinancial.com anytime, ilgfinancial.com, or you can call this number to get an appointment to have a conversation about these things. You have questions about student loan debt forgiveness or whatever's on your mind, 540-720-5656. That's 540-720-5656. Dave, we'll talk to you next time.
Looking forward to it.
The information provided is for educational purposes only and is not intended as investment advice for any individual or entity. All information contained herein is believed to be from reliable sources. However, we make no representation as to its completeness or accuracy. The views presented today are those of Dave Lopez and do not necessarily represent the views of the Alpha Star Capital Management, LLC. The opinions expressed are subject to change without notice and do not constitute financial, legal, or tax advice. Please consult your financial professional before executing any financial strategy. Investment advisory services offered through AlphaStar Capital Management, LLC, a registered investment advisor. AlphaStar and ILG Financial, LLC are independent entities. SEC registration does not constitute an endorsement of the firm by the Commission, nor does it indicate that the advisor has attained a particular level of skill or ability.